Good afternoon, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Those who are viewing online, members of the press, welcome. I take this opportunity today to update you on a matter which is of deep concern to the government and the people of Barbados. That being the unfortunate situation surrounding the plight of our children at the Government Industrial School, which was highlighted over the last couple of months in the media. As the Minister of Home Affairs and Information, I felt it was my personal and professional responsibility to bring this matter before Cabinet, and that was done in April of this year. On April 30th, 2022, the Cabinet agreed that a departmental inquiry should be conducted into the operations at the Government Industrial Schools. This is both schools. The inquiry panel was constituted and work commenced on May 9th, 2022. The results of the inquiry were submitted to the Ministry of Home Affairs on August 15th, 2022. The objectives of the inquiry included, but were not limited to, investigating the allegations which were made and making recommendations to address the same. And when I say investigating the allegations which were made, I mean every allegation that we had notice of, the departmental inquiry was charged with investigating. So those were ones that were made in the press, those are ones that were made anecdotally, those are ones that people were making on the call-in programs. All of the alleged infelicities of which we were aware were within the purview of the departmental inquiry. I wish to publicly thank the inquiry panel for treating this matter with alacrity and for conducting this investigation in a professional manner given the very sensitive nature of this matter, and also for delivering the results within the timeline which was given to them. Now, we had initially set a timeline, and that timeline had to be revised. And when you hear the findings and you hear the depth of the recommendations, you will understand why we decided to take our time to get it right, to be comprehensive, and to have a firm platform from which to work going forward rather than rushing to meet a deadline. These findings and recommendations are timely, they're relevant, and they're important, and represent a critical step in the reformation of the institution and making it both fit for purpose and fit for the times in which we live. This report and its findings and recommendations were presented to the Cabinet on Thursday last. The findings were noted, and the recommendations were fully adopted by the Cabinet with very minor amendments. I can assure you that the Cabinet, having accepted the findings of the panel and its recommendations, the government is committed to the implementation of the recommendations as soon as feasibly possible. In fact, we have already actioned a number of the recommendations. Some of the residents of the institution come from vulnerable backgrounds, and every effort will be made to ensure that while they're in the care of the government, that they're comfortable and benefit from these reform initiatives. Present with us today is the entire panel. There's also a representative, the chairman of the board, the advisory board of the school, as well as the acting principal, Ms. Catherine Jordan. I will introduce the chairman of the panel and then turn this meeting over to him to introduce his panel and to present the findings and the recommendations. Mr. Oral Williams is the chairman. He was appointed the Deputy Commissioner of the Royal Barbados Police Force in May 2020. A former commandant of the Royal Police Training Center, he served as a Director of Plans, Policies, and Police Matters at the Regional Security System Headquarters and Divisional Commander of the Northern Division. He served as the Accreditation Manager for the Barbados Police Service in its quest for accredited status by the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies in 1997, and later served as an assessor with CALEA. Deputy Commissioner Williams was awarded a Bachelor of Arts degree in History and Sociology with honors, Bachelor of Laws degree, and a legal education certificate at the Hugh Wooden Law School in Trinidad and Tobago. And he was called to the bar in 1995. I think that makes him a junior oral. He holds a diploma in management studies at UE and an executive diploma in strategic management from the Chartered Management Institute in the UK. Deputy Commissioner Williams is a graduate of the National Academy of the Federal Bureau of Investigations and the National Policing Improvement Agency. So you can see from the credentials of the chair that the government was very serious about using the best to chair this panel and to conduct these investigations. and I will now turn it over to the chairman of the panel to present his findings and recommendations. And I'm going to invite the other panel member to take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Abrams. Members of the press, Chair of the Advisory Board of the Government Industrial School, Acting Principal Catherine Jordan, members of the press. Let me introduce to you the other panelists and those who assisted us in this investigative exercise. To my left is Tessa Chatterton-Shaw. She is a graduate of McGill University, Canada, where she pursued a Bachelor of Arts degree in French and Spanish literature, a Master of Arts in Latin American and Caribbean Studies from the University of Chicago, and a Master in Business Administration with a focus on public sector management from the Cahill School of Business, University of the West Indies. She is the first manager of the National Council on Substance Abuse, which she led for 14 years, breaking ground in very difficult terrain to transform the entrenched culture of alcohol and other drug abuse in Barbados. She later transitioned to the position of Executive Director of the Caribbean Regional Anti-Doping Organization, RADO, which is responsible for maintaining drug-free athletes and providing anti-doping education to 15 member countries. She spent 5.5 years with Caribbean RADO. She later assumed the position of Project Manager with the CARICOM Secretariat in Guyana, where she worked in the Directorate of Human and Social Development while managing an EU-funded regional project on crime, drugs, and security. Mrs. Chatterton-Shaw has worked locally, regionally, and internationally, and has served as a consultant to the OAS CCAD and to the cooperation program between Latin America, the Caribbean, and the European Union, COPOLAD. To my right is Mrs. Corinne Kennedy Tate, GTE. Mrs. Corinne Kennedy Tate is a graduate of the University of the West Indies. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in History and Economics, a Master of Arts in Education, and a Diploma in Education. Her qualifications include a certificate in management from George Washington University and a certificate in industrial relations from BIMAP. Mrs. Kennedy Tate served as principal of Queen's College for over a decade and was the first female to be appointed as deputy principal of Harrison's College. In addition, she spent many years as a part-time lecturer at the University of the West Indies and at Earlston Teachers Training College. She represented the teaching profession in Barbados on the Caribbean Examinations Council and served on a number of local and regional education committees. She is a published author and has received numerous awards for her outstanding contribution to education, education administration, and community service among the youth. On Republic Day in 2021, she was the recipient of the Gold Trident of Excellence in the National Independence Day Awards. Over to my right is Professor Corinne Bailey, consultant to the panel. Professor Bailey is a senior research fellow at the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies at the University of the West Indies, Cahill campus. He situates his work within the field of sociology with a special interest in crime, violence, and related research. His work on Caribbean crime has resulted in the publication of scholarly work through a variety of mediums, including 16 peer-reviewed journal articles, 3 peer-reviewed book chapters, and 4 peer-reviewed books. Professor Bailey has conducted policy analysis for national, regional, and international governments and agencies. These have included the Government of Jamaica, the Government of Barbados, the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, CARICOM, the Central Development Bank, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, and the Inter-American Development Bank. That's Professor Bailey. Okay, Minister said that we commenced work on May the 9th for an initial period of 6 weeks. And given the intensity of the exercise, we asked for an extension, resulting in our presenting this report, which, to my mind, is a very comprehensive report on our findings. The methodology that we adopted was through a system of interviews, among others. Some 89 persons appeared, and some 109 interviews were conducted at the boardroom of this ministry, in this very room. The extent of the interviews lasted from between 1 hour to 3 hours at times. And we found ourselves sometimes working into the early hours of the night. Public service announcements were made requesting presentations and participation by members of the public, from members of staff, from former members of staff, from residents, former residents, the chair of the advisory board, medical staff who interacted with residents, BDF, that's the Barbados Defense Force, and Barbados Prison Service, who provided security support staff. The panel paid some 7 visits to the plants at Dodds and Barrows. We did make use of some secondary sources that included letters and newspaper articles, the Government Industrial School Act, the United Nations Rules and Guidelines on the Treatment of Juveniles in Detention, literature on best practices in other jurisdictions, police files, resident files, the information book at the Government Information School, the Government Industrial School, circulars to staff, training documents, job description, minutes of the advisory board, among other things. I will now move on to some of our findings and observations. I made reference earlier to a comprehensive report being submitted to the ministry. This addressed every area of concern raised in our investigation, and it would be impossible to raise all at this briefing. But before I proceed any further, let me remind you of the sensitive nature of this exercise, particularly as it relates to the privacy of residents, the innocence of those accused of breaches of any law, any current criminal investigation, and any proceedings before the courts of Barbados arising out of incidents or allegations at the Government Industrial School. Having visited the plant, we noticed that the staff complement was 52, with 34 members of staff at Dodds in St. Philip and 18 members of staff at Barrows in St. Lucie. At the commencement of this exercise, a total of 7 females and 9 males were at Barrows and Dodds respectively. Barrows needed refurbishing, and Dodds, though an old property, was relatively well kept. The panel recommended the removal of the females to Dodds. Communication among the staff and management was a concern. Some members of staff accused management of various forms of victimization, such as unfair dismissal, refusal to approve study leave, problems with vacation leave, negative performance appraisal reports, supersession and non-payment of wages. The panel recommended that a clear and unambiguous code of conduct for staff should be put in place. All policies, protocols, rules, and regulations should be recorded in an operational manual, and every member of staff should be given a copy of the manual. Further, regular staff meetings should be held, and the minutes of the meeting should be taken and shared with the Ministry of Home Affairs and Information and the advisory board. Several members of staff who are employed by the GIS lack the academic qualifications and the expertise required to cater to the educational, vocational, physical, psychiatric, and psychological requirements of troubled youth. The management, past and present, failed to put the appropriate mechanism in place to ensure that the staff receive the proper training to effectively implement the reform measures. The internecine warfare among the staff and the breakdown in discipline among the residents rendered the house mistress at Barrows impotent to effectively manage that institution. The panel recommended that an audit of the staff should be carried out to determine which members were suitable to work in a reform institution. Employees deemed unsuitable should be replaced by the personnel with the appropriate skills and expertise to cater to at-risk youth. Additionally, there should be a continuous training program for all staff. These should include an induction course for every employee before he or she commences employment at the government industrial school, and refresher courses throughout the year for every category of employee. The government industrial school was not in full compliance with the United Nations rules relating to juveniles being held in custody. The inquiry panel recognized that the ministry sought the assistance of a child justice consultant and UNICEF to assist in these areas. Lucy Dawes prepared an operational manual for use at the government industrial schools. And if it had been followed, it would have significantly improved the policies and the practices of the government industrial school. Even though the administration tried to introduce some of the recommendations outlined in the Dawes manual, very few of them had been successfully implemented. The inquiry panel recommended that the administration should move with haste to ensure that the Lucy Dawes document is perfected and that its recommendations are implemented. The panel also sought that government should accelerate the process of enacting the legislation relating to juvenile justice to give the required legal status to the recommended reforms. The legislation under which the government industrial schools operate is the Reformatory and Industrial School Act, Cap 169 of the laws of Barbados. This legislation was in place since 1926 and is outdated. This legislation was in place, since 1926 and is outdated. The inquiry found that a new child justice legislation act was drafted in 2019, but now has to be laid in Parliament because it awaits companion legislation governing child protection. The inquiry panel is of the view that the implementation of the appropriate legislation would make it easier for the institution to follow the United Nations rules. Furthermore, the GIS will be in a better position to harmonize its policies and practices with internationally accepted criteria and best practices. The panel stressed that it was important that the appropriate legislation be enacted to facilitate the process of implementing the reforms to the operations of the GIS. The panel also found that the educational requirements of the residents were not being adequately met. The panel found that there was very little evidence to suggest that a rigorous program of academic, technical, vocational, or physical instruction was being provided. The inquiry recommended that the full-time and part-time teachers with academic qualification should be employed and teaching should be done in mixed ability groups. The panel found too that some of the residents have mental health issues and conduct disorders, and the psychosocial and psychiatric requirements of the residents were being met in a very limited way. The panel recommended that a dedicated medical unit comprising a team of doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, and nurses should be employed. Furthermore, greater use of the psychiatric nurses was needed in dealing with the initial or suspected mental health issues prior to patients being dispatched to the psychiatric hospital. The panel found too that residents saw themselves as being untouchable and refused to obey even reasonable instructions. Some of them used abusive language with impunity, were disrespectful, and even physically assaulted members of staff. The panel was of the view that this contributed in no small way to the state of unrest at the Barrows facility. The panel recommended that any method of punishment should focus on a change in behavior rather than one of inflicting fear. I wish to report that the reform is being implemented, and it will encompass every aspect of the child's life, that is educational, technical, vocational, physical, psychiatric, and psychosocial. This is important so that the teenagers will be engaged in meaningful activities to help them re-enter society, function as law-abiding citizens, and make a meaningful contribution to national development. The inquiry found that with respect to disciplinary practices, there were a few incidents of staff using corporal punishment as a means of punishment. Even though some of the residents were not able to make contact with relatives when the institution tried to contact parents, they refused to accept calls from their wards at GIS. Additionally, attorneys were never denied visits, but residents complained that the conversations were too short. There were reports of bullying among teenagers, but these ended hastily due to the staff vigilance and intervention. There was an incident reported to us of excessive force where a resident resisted and more than one staff member was struck. This matter is now before the court. Staff members were physically and verbally abused by residents. Insufficient attention was paid to complaints made by residents. A suite of recommendations has been made which take into account a wide range of concerns, including discipline, operational issues, the physical plan, education, staffing, and mental health. And now move on to discipline. Given the shift in focus to a rehabilitative form of a punitive institution, there remains a need for the management and staff to have proper protocols in place to discipline residents who engage in unsatisfactory behavior. They must have at their disposal a system of rewards and sanctions that are suitable and effective tools to manage the resident population. The rehabilitative objective of the government industrial school must also include provision for the safety, care, and comfort of both staff and residents. The environment must be one that encourages mutual trust and confidence, with the interests of the resident being of paramount importance. The panel recommends the repeal of the existing primary legislation dealing with the juvenile justice and the introduction of new child justice legislation, together with the necessary rules and regulations governing activities at GIS. This new legislation should enhance the overall operation at the institution. With the approval of the Ministry of Home Affairs and with the assistance of the staff, the administration should be authorized to perfect and implement the Lucy Dawes operations manual, develop a written code of disciplines for the residents, implement a workable system of rewards and sanctions for residents, develop a code of conduct that specifically relates to the employees of the government industrial schools. This code should complement rather than replace the existing one that governs the conduct of public servants. In the shortest period of time, complete the drafting of both the child protection and child justice legislation and have them laid in Parliament. To ensure compliance locally and across the region, the government should encourage the establishment of a Juvenile Rights Commission under the umbrella of CARICOM. The Commission should be responsible for the periodic inspection and the provision of constructive advice to juvenile detention centers across the region. This would ensure compliance with the UN rules. This commission should be authorized to grant accreditation status to those centers that prove compliance. Operational issues. The panel recommends that formal management and staff meetings should be held regularly with a clear agenda. Staff members should have the opportunity to ventilate their concerns. Their complaints should be given a fair hearing and they should be addressed in a timely manner. Copies of the minutes should be distributed to the staff, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Home Affairs, and the advisory board. Annual reports should be prepared and delivered to the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Home Affairs. By the end of February the following year. In that report, all matters relating to and impacting on the operations and management of the school should be clearly outlined and discussed. A yearly vacation schedule should be prepared for the staff. The vacation roster should be based on requests submitted by the staff to the management of the institution no later than December 31st of the year preceding that in which the vacation is to be taken. An effort should be made to ensure that no staff member applies for and or proceeds on leave at the same time each year. This would be in the interest of fairness since other individuals might be desirous of taking their leave at that time. The promotion process should be clear and transparent. Promotions should be awarded on the basis of seniority, expertise, and job performance. The vacant position should be advertised, applicants interviewed, and the most suitable candidate appointed to fill the vacancy. Staff members who are not qualified to work with troubled teenagers and those who do not have the prerequisites to qualify for training programs should be relieved of their posts at the school and redistributed throughout the public service. Any staff member who has allegedly engaged in sexual abuse of residents under his or her care should be immediately sent on leave and not be allowed to return until he or she has been cleared of the allegation. The staff member should not return if he or she wins the case in court because of a technicality. The recommendations made by Lucy Dawes in her final report, page 18, should be implemented. The report suggested that the positions of principal and vice principal should be abolished, and these should be replaced by a director with overall responsibility for the institution and 2 deputy directors, one whose responsibility would be welfare and programs, and the other with responsibility for security and administration. Since the posts of principal and deputy principal are both vacant, that recommendation will be relatively easy to implement. A consultant with experience in change management should be appointed for 1 year to supervise the transition of the JAS from its present state into an efficient effective, secure residential facility. Physical plant. In the absence of funds to build a secure residential facility, consideration should be given to upgrading the facility at Dodds, and female residents should be removed from barracks and housed at Dodds. Given the growing distaste of Barbadians for the mandatory detention of juveniles for minor offenses and the concomitant reduction in numbers sent to the institution, consideration will be given to housing a maximum of 50 residents at the school. The government should also make accommodation available through the Child Care Board to accommodate children who are in need of care, discipline, and protection outside of the home environment. As it relates to buildings, again, a new key system should be introduced with electronic locks and keys. Cameras should be installed in all non-private areas to facilitate the audio and video recording of occurrences. The footage should be stored on a server off-site for purposes of transparency and security. There should be a refurbishment of the masonry room, the carpenter workshop, and gym to ensure that residents will be afforded the opportunity to hone their skills in those areas. The walls and perimeter fences surrounding Dawes property should be strengthened. I turn now to education and some general recommendations. The school day should be so structured that students are engaged in positive and purposeful activities at all times. These should be recreational, educational, and developmental, and should cover the entire period from the wake-up call until bedtime. A weekly roster and a daily timetable should both be displayed on notice boards and in a prominent position around the school. They should also be available in an electronic format. Any changes to this program should be conveyed to the staff and students at the earliest possible opportunity. Every resident should be provided with academic and vocational training and have access to all social and physical activities provided by the school. Residents should be given limited opportunity to interact with members of the public at open days or other organized activities. If residents assisted in a project, agriculture, or craft, and the product is sold, then they should be given a small stipend. Those funds should be kept in an account for the resident, and they should have access to the funds when requested. A mentorship program should be implemented where staff and members of the public interact with residents to provide them with the positive role models and to equip them with a support system when it is required. The panel also recommends the government industrial school be run by a board of management, which would include educators and healthcare professionals. It should have responsibility for staff recruitment, for the physical plan, and advising the minister on policy decisions. The principal should be responsible for the day-to-day management of the school. The panel also recommends that the board should work with training institutions in the country: Erdiston, Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute, the Barbados Community College, the Vocational Training Board, and the ministry responsible for youth affairs to develop training programs that are tailored to suit the specific needs of the residents of the government industrial school. As it relates to staff selection and recruitment, there should be a rigorous vetting process. Educators employed to instruct students in the academic, technical, vocational subjects should all be called teachers and should be timetabled as such. The school should be staffed with a cadre of teachers who are trained in pedagogy and possess the expertise in the discipline that they teach. Academic and non-academic staff should be individuals who possess the characteristics of integrity, empathy, and the ability to interact with adolescents in a professional and non-judgmental manner. At all times, staff members should conduct themselves in such a manner that they earn the respect of the residents. They should exhibit a positive value system and ensure that they can operate as positive role models for the residents to emulate. This implies that remuneration offered to staff members should be sufficient to attract and retain staff members of the highest caliber. The GIS should move with haste to develop a clear and unambiguous code of conduct to tighten up discipline at the institution. It should be issued to every resident upon arrival. There should be a clear and unambiguous code of conduct for staff. All policies, protocols, rules, and regulations should be recorded in an operations manual. Every member of staff should be given a copy of that manual, either in print or electronic form. The panel recommends that the GIS should move with haste to implement the recommendation of the Lucy Dawes operational manual. I turn now to specific recommendations. The panel recommends that there should be an induction course for every staff member entering the institution for the first time. In addition, there should be a thorough background check done for all prospective staff members. It should involve the presentation of a police certificate of character and periodic rescreening on an annual basis. A week should be set aside for professional development for staff. That could be done in groups over a period of time to minimize disruption of the GIS's routine. This training should focus on the professional needs of the staff and the psychosocial needs of the residents. Staff development and training programs should be done on a continuous basis. A system should be in place where staff members, both academic and non-academic, will be given leave of absence to upgrade their work-related skills. A special needs teacher on staff is needed to cater to the gifted children and to children who have learning deficits. There should be consultation with a nutritionist or the appropriate department with the Ministry of Health and Wellness on staff to cater to the requirements of the students. A guidance counselor and a social worker should also be on staff. There should be access to a dedicated medical unit comprising a team of doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, and nurses. That team would operate on a full-time basis. The nursing staff, guidance counselors, and the social worker should be present to service to organize a vibrant health and family life education program to help the residents cope with the vicissitudes of adolescence, as well as with the problems associated with separation from their families and friends. That program should also include modules in personal hygiene, mental health, sex education, and substance abuse. There should be access to an information technology coordinator with responsibility for resolving IT challenges and assisting with teaching. There should be a designated librarian whose responsibility should be to ensure that the library was fully stocked with age-appropriate books, magazines, and periodicals. There ought to be a state-of-the-art library which would include books, magazines, and periodicals suitable for adolescents. It should include handheld devices and desktop computers to provide access to additional information and for research. Access to and the provision of full-time and part-time teachers on staff with qualifications in science, mathematics, English, social studies, physical education, industrial arts, visual arts, performing arts, foreign languages, business studies, and home management should be on the cards. Tuition should be provided in as many of the subjects as is reasonably possible and which are included in the national educational curriculum. Staff appointed on a permanent basis should be buttressed by part-time and volunteer workers as the need arises. Any assistance offered by community groups and voluntary organizations should be embraced, particularly if the assistance can enhance the developmental process of the resident. Some of those persons could serve as mentors to provide residents with positive role models and to equip them with a support system when it is required. A system to be implemented whereby teaching will be done in 4 mixed ability groups by level. Level 1 and 2 will be introductory, whilst levels 3 and 4 would prepare students for external examinations such as CXC, the Caribbean Vocational Qualification, and the City and Guilds examination. A system should be in place whereby the preparation of performance review and development reports on all staff members be done in a timely manner. Presented to the staff for perusal, signed and forwarded to the appropriate government department. The panel recommended a review of the existing shift system to ensure coverage and greater productivity from staff. The panel also recommended a proper incident reporting system, and the keeping of records of the same should be established. An accurate record of all notable events that occur at the GIS and the information book should be had. The panel suggests that the information book be replaced with a properly ruled diary in the short run, and consideration should be given to its eventual replacement by a digital diary. This diary should be accessible to all members of staff. There should be an efficient and effective system of rewards and sanctions. The protocol should be clear and their implementation consistent. Residents and staff should have a clear understanding of their rights and responsibilities. The panel believes that if that is done, then discipline at the GIS would improve. Issues related to mental health and intake policy. The GIS administration, with the assistance of healthcare professionals, should develop a comprehensive health screening protocol for juveniles when they arrive. Medical and mental health history, as well as other background information, should be obtained from the resident, his parents, and/or the referring party. There should be a structured interview and observation by the admission team to get as much information as possible. That information should include but not be limited to present and past illness, recent injuries, immunization records, history of medical and mental health problems and conditions, including suicidal or self-harm history, prescribed medication, allergies, history of abuse of drugs or alcohol, type and amount, frequency, and the last time use, pregnancy status, infectious diseases, dental problems, vision problems, medical and mental health hospitalizations, observations by staff, including state of consciousness, mental status, appearance, including injuries, bruising, and conduct. Psychological, psychiatric assessment should be conducted within 24 hours after admission. This is the process whereby specific tests combined with the psychologist's experience are used to diagnose and formulate effective treatment plans for the residents. Other recommendations in relating to mental health and wellness. In the short term, GIS should work with the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and the Psychiatric Hospital to develop clear and unambiguous protocols relating to the expeditious transport, treatment, security, and admission of residents. However, in the long term, the GIS should work towards being a self-sufficient care facility to reduce transportation costs and for expedient mental medical care. The GIS should seek to transport their residents in their own vehicles to attend appointments. This should be mandatory for committals and remands. Where residents were housed as overnighters, the police should continue to transport them to and from that institution. Given the shift in focus from a punitive to a rehabilitative institution, there should be available a cadre of specially trained staff members to operate on the daily shifts at the GIS. Based on the number of children in residence, the ratio should be based on a best practice. Given the close relationship between GIS and the psychiatric hospital, personnel from that hospital should be encouraged to execute training sessions for GIS staff. Greater use should be made of the psychiatric nurse on staff at GIS in dealing with initial or suspected mental health issues prior to patients being dispatched to the hospital. Where possible, accommodation should be made for the initial psychiatric assessment to be undertaken at the GIS before transfer of a student to the psychiatric hospital. The appropriate ministry should put a mechanism in place to detect troubled youth at an early stage. Given the risk and dysfunctional population under the care of the GIS, staff should be given mental health breaks and an annual retreat held to build camaraderie and team spiritedness. Training for all staff and basic self-defense techniques and the use and application of articles of restraint is essential for the protection of staff from residents who are prone to violence. It must be remembered that there are children and excessive force should never be used. Supervisors should not dispense medication to residents without knowledge of the illness or the type of medication being dispensed. Sharp tools, cutlery, knives, chemicals, poisons, or any other article that can be used as a weapon should not ordinarily be accessible to residents. Wandering should be decriminalized. The name of the GIS should be changed to one that is more child-friendly, more empowering, and that reflects rehabilitation and reform. You would have noticed that prior to this exercise, the government and the administration had commenced the work for the amelioration of matters at the government industrial school. It is the wish of the panel that these will continue, and in due course they will act on the recommendations that the panel has made. In closing, I take the opportunity to thank all of those who appeared before the panel and in any other way contributing to making this exercise possible, including those individuals and organizations mentioned earlier: the Barbados Fire Service, the Permanent Secretary in this Ministry of Home Affairs and her staff for making the documentation available to us, for providing us with meals and a home to conduct our work. You will also, I believe the minister would refer to this, but we have not gone back there since we have submitted our report, but we have been informed that work has commenced at the plant at Dodds to improve the physical conditions there and provide for the movement of the females from Barrows to St. Philip at Dodds. So at this stage, I want to thank the members of the press for giving me the opportunity as chairman of this committee to give you an insight into some of the problems that have been reported to us and the recommendations that we have made, which we are of the view will provide a better institution for children that are troubled. Thank you very much.
Yes, we can open the floor to questions from the press to the panel.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Sharika Griffith from CBC. Mr. Williams, my question is for you. One of the main issues ventilated in the public as it relates to the GIS would have been that of abuse and mistreatment of residents. Can you say what your findings have been on these matters?
Any specific issues you want to raise with me? Because
Go ahead.
because you would, I believe I said it earlier, there was the whole matter of corporal punishment. And corporal punishment, although provision is made for it in the old legislation, the document produced by Lucy Dawes and the ministry has said no more corporal punishment. But there was at least one or two instances where there was abuse, physical abuse, to residents by members of staff.
If I may follow on from my colleague at CBC, during your investigation, did you unearth any specific issues to the recent problems which would have played out in the press? And by that I mean the runaways, the young lady in the cell. Did any of your investigations unearth any facts around those?
As it relates to the young lady in the cell, I believe that was dealt with by the minister and the ministry. We tried to get information on it from members of the public and people appearing before the panel, but no one came forward and gave us any information whatsoever in relation to that. In fact, there were some members of staff who were very cooperative with us, and when we tried to see if we can get the information and the photograph and so on from them, nothing so was available.
And the runaways?
The runaways, the runaways is a different problem. The runaway problem now is one of those issues now that's before the courts, and that's one of the areas that we would not want to touch.
Go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon, Chairman. You've outlined several recommendations which you would like to see take place at the JS. In terms of a money value, because there seem to be quite a number of changes in terms of increasing the complement and so forth. Would you be able to put a money value to those changes?
Increasing the complement of
Staff.
staff?
Well, you spoke about a dedicated medical unit, psychiatrists, and so forth.
Okay.
So forth. I just want, in terms of money, how much money do you think it would take?
I will not be in a position to answer that. I don't even think the minister will be able to answer that.
What I can say in relation to that is the government has taken all the recommendations on board, and we are going to action them as quickly as we can. Obviously, where resources have to be found, we have to find those resources. So you must understand that this was a recent presentation of these findings and recommendations. We are going to look at how quickly we can do it, and then we'll probably be in a position to give you some indication. But to pull a figure out of the air, we now have to go through all the recommendations, prioritize them, and then as we do that, the cost factor will become more apparent. But I'm not in a position to actually even begin to address the cost. However, for the things that are critical, then the money has to be found, quite frankly.
It's another question quickly. Now, this, based on the presentation here today, appears to be a complete overhaul. I don't know if there's any other description for it, but a complete overhaul of the system. And the minister could correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems unlikely that this could all be implemented in one fell swoop. Now, of the recommendations so far, what would you consider the most critical that must be implemented right now in order to have that high level of functionality at the institution requires at this point?
I believe accommodation is one. And that's why the ministry is in the process of moving the girls from Barrows to Dodds. The other critical area is staffing issues. Staffing issues, and when I say staffing issues, I am referring to the problems that the current administration faces now.
Is it Colville? Yeah. This certainly was not a fairy tale, what we had to deal with. I think it's important for the public to know that at the core of this problem that has been going on for years, institution started in 1883, is children come in from highly dysfunctional homes. I think it's important for people to know that, for the public to know that I identified about 25 different risk factors. Poverty and neglect, ineffective parenting or no parenting, children parenting themselves, early sexual initiation, children raised in institutional care from birth, children whose parents are deceased or they are incarcerated, children whose parents have serial or multiple sexual relationships, suicidal children with mental health disorders. I know Mr. Williams mentioned the physical plant, that the mental health component is a very serious one that needs to be addressed. And I think is made even more serious with the impact of COVID. And these children who are children don't run from homes where they are loved and valued and supported. These children are not criminals, but they're running from abuse, and they need this. I hope soon, Minister, we will not have to ever use the word government industrial school, but it needs a dedicated staff, dedicated psychiatric and staff with a psychological background as well as education. But it was horrific to hear some of the stories. There were a few shining lights, and those girls who Sean were ones who said, I taught myself. And they had tremendous resiliency skills. There's a lot of work to be done.
Mr. Mumsy, to respond to a question you asked about what were the main issues. One of the things we saw was the problem of staffing. There were serious problems relating to staffing. There were staff members who were not qualified for the positions that they were in. And one of the things we recommended was that there be a staff audit, that every staff member be interviewed to see whether or not that staff member can fit into the new government industrial school. If that person is not able to be fitted into the new school, then that person should be transferred and someone else who is a better fit should be employed. There should be rigorous staff recruitment protocols in place.
If I may ask, was there any determination of how it was that these people came to be employed at this institution if they weren't sufficiently qualified?
I suspect that many of them, from our interviews, we discovered that many of those persons were there for a very, very, very long time. And say like 20 years and that kind of thing. And in those days, we did not have people with the kinds of qualifications that we have now. So people with 2 O levels and that kind of thing were employed in positions. Because of the transition, we are finding that those people are now like square pegs in round holes, and they just cannot cope with the requirements at the government industrial school. They are troubled girls, troubled boys, and they just do not have many of them don't have the intellectual capacity to cope with the problems that exist.
Obviously, I don't think you'd have done the full audit as yet, but do you have an idea as to the extent of the disparity in qualifications based on what is required and what is currently existing?
There are a number of people on staff that do not fit the qualifications for the job descriptions. Lucy Dawes, in her document, developed a series of job descriptions for various categories of worker. And many of them just do not fit, but they are appointed to the post. And that is why we recommended that there be an audit and some of those people be redistributed throughout the system.
Question, afternoon. Bernardo, Starcom Network News. Just wanted to clarify, is it that there should be, or there would be one facility at Dodge to house everyone?
We are moving, that's the position that the government is moving towards, bringing everybody onto one compound, because there are certain benefits to be gained by so doing.
To address that, yes, it is a case of bringing everyone onto one compound, but obviously there will be appropriate separations, right? As it stands now, we have a few girls at Barrows and a few boys at Dodds, not anywhere near the full complement for each institution, but you operate different teaching staff at each institution. I guess you have different medical accesses at each institution, 2 different kitchens. So it is pretty much a bit of a nightmare and a waste of resources to operate 2 different sets of infrastructure or human resources when you can combine a lot of the administrative functions. So we're trying to give the best care, the best schooling, the best opportunities, but we're trying to do it in a way that makes sense and allows us to spend the money a lot less on having 2 of everything and a lot more on the critical programs that are needed to for the young people. And you asked, Colville, what are some of the things that are critical and that the government is looking to do immediately? What I can tell you is the child justice legislation has been drafted and has been completed for quite a while. We did not seek to push the child justice legislation because it is not entirely about the punitive aspect. The child justice legislation deals with the children once they come into the system. And it was thought by this cabinet and this government that you'd be sending the wrong message dealing solely with the judicial aspect of it and the penal aspect of it without dealing with the protection part of it. So the decision was taken to bring the 2 pretty much as companion legislation. I am pleased to tell you that having spoken to Minister Humphrey 2 weeks ago, he has received the draft child protection legislation, and that has been circulated to the stakeholders. They're going to take final comments on it. So there was a large consultative process before the legislation, before the policy was settled, and it was sent off to the drafters with instructions. So that legislation has now come back. It has been circulated to the stakeholders. Minister Humphrey advised me that he's meeting intensively with the persons who are responsible with an aim to bring in that legislation to the cabinet for its approval, and thereafter we will proceed with the two pieces of legislation together, and that is coming in very, very short order. I'm hesitant to give times. I would tell you certainly before the end of the year, right? And I would like to be in a position to tell you a lot shorter than that, but that is one of the number one priorities of this government at this point in time, to be able to create that legislative framework, have it dealt with, done with, so we can get rid of the charge of wandering. That's a principle one for us. So we can put things in place to identify at-risk youth and keep them out of the system. That we can provide the care for our young people and provide the facilities recommended to facilitate that care and to promote behavioral change in behavioral practices, right? And not simply seek to figure out what to do with them once they've been arrested and charged and whatnot. We're trying to keep them out of the system as opposed to trying to get in the best experience in the system. So I can tell you that the light is at the end of the tunnel for this one. I've seen the legislation, so it is there, and we're simply fine-tuning, and very likely in short order. I think Minister Humphrey had indicated to me within 14 days he actually wanted to come back to cabinet on it, but I won't pin him to that. But I'll tell you, it is that close for us that we're setting timelines like that. So it is coming, and it's coming very quickly.
Final question for me, Minister Abrams. As it relates to the move of the girls from Barrows to Dodds, how close are we to seeing that become a reality?
The move was initially scheduled, well, we had expected the completion of the renovations by, I think, the 9th of September this year. But the thing, Dodds is an old facility. It's an old building. Anybody who knows about trouble in those old buildings is that you start to dig into a wall and then you discover things that you didn't know. So we were asked for an extension of time to the end of this month to complete the renovations. They're pushing ahead. A lot of the principal facilities are in the 90% complete zone. There are a couple that we've identified some other issues with, and we're looking to get those done as quickly as possible. But as I said, it is a priority for us to close down Barrows with all the stigmas attached to it and bring the young ladies to a position where they can be a lot more comfortable, where they're purpose-built facilities, where we can actually implement a lot of the educational and reformatory initiatives that have come out of the Lucy Dawes report and have been identified by this panel. I can't overstate. This panel has done tremendous work. The advisor, Dr. Corian Bailey, has been a star. They have interviewed a lot of every person that came forward saying, I want to make a statement, has been entertained by the panels. Detailed reports have been kept, and the panel has been, when I saw the initial report, I said, wow, because they pretty much went into everything. There's some questions that y'all asked and you're dancing around it, and I know what it is that you're trying to get at, but I'll tell you the difficulty here. When I tell you the panel investigated everything that was in front of it, they investigated everything. They've made some recommendations to us. They've identified some issues that I cannot speak to here because there are proceedings currently in play in the courts. So I can't say anything that would prejudice or compromise those proceedings. But yes, some concerns have been raised by the panel. Some definite recommendations have been raised by the panel that have serious consequences attached to them. And as you can understand, it is a very sensitive thing. I don't want, the chair of the panel met with the Solicitor General's office just before coming in here. We had a discussion with the lawyer who's dealing with some of the matters from the Solicitor General's office, and she once again implored the chair, look, I know you want to do a full presentation here, but please bear in mind that certain things may compromise proceedings currently before the court. So I can tell you that everything that was raised by the press was investigated by the panel. In some instances, people did not come forward with the evidence, but every opportunity was presented for persons to come forward with the evidence. Even in some cases where the evidence was not there, but the panel was still convinced that it was in the best interests of the children to make certain recommendations, they did make those recommendations. And as I said, we will act on those recommendations. I'm not about concealing anything. I'm not about any cover-up. You heard from the chairman himself, this was a seriously in-depth investigation, right? And it augurs well for the institution, or whatever structure replaces the institution. We have taken on board all of the recommendations. This is not political. This is not about saving face. This is about our children and creating the best chance for them. I have interacted with some of the young ladies, as Tessa said. You got some stars there. You have some really, really bright kids who found themselves in a difficult position, and our duty to them is to put things in place to allow them to be their best selves. That despite the circumstance in which they find themselves now, they should have every educational opportunity and facility that everybody else in the outside has. They should, if they're not academically inclined, they should be given the options that exist in the other schools to allow them to become a mason, a carpenter, whatever. Even down to cosmetology. One of the recommendations was that we put things in place to allow the girls to practice cosmetology. Well, I don't want to be sexist. The girls or the fellas, if they want to practice cosmetology. The principal has activated a number, the acting principal has activated a number of the recommendations already, and things are being put in place to allow them to get the CVQs, so that going up there is not a calculated waste of 3 years of your life. If you have to spend time in the institution or in the care of the government, then that time must be well spent, and we must give you every chance to come out ahead of the game or better than when you went in. So I know you're very good at reading between the lines. I have given you the lines to read between all the allegations, every single thing that was raised, even in the press that didn't have witness statements attached to it, was investigated and recommendations were made, and we will follow those recommendations that are in the best interest of the children. Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay. Further questions? Chair, would you like to say anything? Or Professor Corin? No?
Good afternoon. I'll be very short. I want to just, on behalf of the board, the advisory board, to say thank you to the panel, especially the chairman, Mr. Oral Cummins, Mr. Oral Williams, for such an in-depth, comprehensive report. And I could see that you spent a lot of time, discussing and dialoguing and reaching those recommendations. I want to highly commend your recommendations as it pertains to the immediate implementation of the Lucy Dawes procedural manual. It's something that I've been agitating about. The board, we're always looking to see those things implemented, because we believe that all of the recommendations in that manual will come to help to make the institution a more reformed institution, and will at least help to change a lot of things that are happening that are negative that you've seen in your investigation, and that will bring the institution to a place where we all can feel better and comfortable knowing that our children are being taken care of, or our children are given the chance at rehabilitation and reform. So I want to thank you. I also want to commend you on the fact that you were able to see not just the things that were happening to the residents, but you also saw things that were happening to the staff, and that you made recommendations that there be protection of the staff from the residents. Sometimes we can get lost in the fact that, and we're all here to take care of the residents. Our concerns, the board's concern is to make sure that we advise the minister on behalf of matters concerning the welfare, the security, and that of the students, the residents, but also on behalf of the staff. And so I'm glad that your report is balanced, and that you're looking also at protection, not just for the residents, but you're looking at the protection also for the staff, and I highly commend you on that. And so I want to say this, I'm sure that the board, members of the board who are watching, are very pleased with the report, and pleased especially with the recommendations that we're hearing, and we believe it can augur well for the future of the institution and the betterment of those residents that will be in that institution now, presently, and those that will have to go there at some further date. I also wanted to say that, as you kept mentioning the fact that we need to move away from have a name change of the institution, and in that same manual, Ms. Lucy Dawes made recommendations to have the name change, and we're already using that sometimes in our discussions. It's secure residential facility, rather than just saying the GIS institution. So the things that you've looked at, are already, a lot of those things are in the procedural manual, and I believe that the minister, the members of the board, the administration, those persons that will be managing the facility would have heard your recommendations, and that with immediate effect, as much as possible, those recommendations will be implemented. I'm very grateful also that the cabinet has already okayed and ratified, or given a yes, a nod to your recommendations. And so I stand here to support the minister and to support the panel on your recommendations. And I thank you on behalf of the board, advisory board of the GIS.
I just want to emphasize the strong mental health thread that ran through this, not just residents, but staff. There were staff who said they had to pray before they went into work and ask God to help them through the day. We must not, as Barbadians, shy away from talking about mental health and conduct disorders. And some of these are congenital, and others are episodic because of traumatic life events that these children have suffered. Thank you.
Allow me to say no in closing. This was a departmental inquiry. And a department inquiry is a bit different from a commission of inquiry, which is a quasi-judicial investigation into a specific instance or institution, and is meant to be held in public. The purpose of this departmental inquiry was effectively to give the findings to the minister and to make recommendations to the minister on which the government can act to make things better at the institution. Because of the depth of what was investigated, and because of the thoroughness of the report, and because also of the public interest and the interest generated in the press, we took a decision to invite the chair of the panel, invite the entire panel to actually present their findings and their recommendations, and it not come through a filter, a political filter or anything like that. So that's why the panel actually did the entire presentation and took your questions, and it wasn't me giving my, spin on it. So that is, I just want to explain, we didn't have to go as in-depth as we did, but I think we owed it to you, the press, who's been on top of this issue. We owed it to the people of Barbados, and we owe it to the residents of the institution to be as transparent as possible. We're not hiding anything, as I said. We're trying to heal and move forward. One last thing I will say, because I got a question just now. All of the evidence taken by the panel will be made available to the Commissioner of Police. So whereas I can't tell you certain specific things, anything that indicates criminal happening, or anything that may properly warrant a more thorough investigation by the Office of the Commissioner of Police, will be brought to his attention. But the police, the Royal Barbados Police Force, the Commissioner of Police, will have full access to the report and to all of the evidence that was taken. So anything that indicates an offense, it will now be up to the police to do what it is that they have to do. I don't think we could be any more transparent than that. So unless there are any further questions from you all, Chair, is your press conference. I will allow you to have the parting statement.
Thank you, Minister. Once again, I want to thank the PS, the Permanent Secretary of this ministry for the assistance that she has given, Commissioner of Police, the Chief Fire Officer, the Chief of Staff, BDF, and all the people who participated in this this exercise. The Minister has spoken. I believe the other members of the panel are glad to hear. The board has spoken about the high esteem in which they have viewed the report that we have submitted. And I want to thank all of you, and I hope that you will let Barbados know that the administration of GIS and the government of Barbados is not sitting down and doing nothing about what is alleged to have happened at the GIS. So thank you all for coming. Have a good afternoon.